The first thing that I would say is important is walking campus. So for me, I showed up on a Sunday, I walked through all of the different wings of campus and I figured out where the labs were, where the classes were, where the big lecture halls were. This really helped me, and also finding out where the bathrooms are because you don't have a lot of time in between classes. It helps you show up on time, it helps you streamline your day so you know maybe where you're parking if you're in Canada and your classes are in the wintertime. You want to park as close as possible to wherever your classes are so that you're not outside in -30. Now the next thing that I found important is to differentiate between core classes and elective classes. Now your core classes are going to be things like your lab, your clinical, and your theory. And these classes are usually all tied together. So for my particular program, if you did not pass one of those classes or you're doing poorly in it, you would be warned, and if you failed it, you would have to start completely over again the next semester with all 3 of those classes. So those were core classes. The other classes that I'm talking about are the elective component classes. So things like communications for nursing and psychology, still very important classes, but not core courses. If you fail them, you can just pick them up in the future semesters or pick them up in a summer, things like that. So the reason I say differentiate between these 2 courses is because you're going to want to put all of your time and energy into those core courses first, and then give whatever is left of yourself to those elective courses. Do not put all of your time and energy into courses that if you do fail them, you can do them again. Make sure that you're not going to be holding yourself back in the program and maintain those core courses. The next thing that I found very helpful is buying a huge, ginormous calendar. This big calendar was helpful to me to write down all of the major things that were coming up for my classes. So things like midterms, quizzes, and final exams. Now, there's of course a lot more that happens during your classes, small assignments and things that are due weekly in modules. However, I had a notebook on the side for that, which I'll get to in a minute. So the reason you want to have all of these things in a giant calendar is so that you don't lose track and be surprised by a midterm or an exam coming up. Usually the exams are very heavily weighted, things like 25 to 45%. So you want to make sure that you are giving yourself a proper amount of time. So for myself, it was about 2 weeks of making sure I've read the material up to this point so that I have 2 weeks to then prepare and just review all of that material. Now, when you go through and you see this plotted out for your semesters, it just gives you a lot of ease so that you don't lose anything and you don't just fall behind in one of your classes. Now, the other part of that is the notebook. So the notebook I would have on the side, and that would be things for like my modules and getting through certain homework and readings. And I would write down every single class. So if it was anatomy, lab, theory, clinical, you want to make sure that you're writing down everything that has to be due that week. And even if it's reading and you read the chapter during class or during a break, just write it in there and then cross it out so that you know you're not missing anything. This sets you up so that when things get really, really busy, which they do, you know you're not missing any little thing in a course, because even though they're small, things like the readings and the modules, they are things that can compound at the very end of a semester and make it very stressful when you should just be studying for an exam and reviewing things and trying to be as calm as possible. The next thing is how I approached my notes and classwork. So when I was sitting in class, I always had my computer up like this, and I would be typing in notes, sticky notes on my PowerPoint. So most classes do send you a PowerPoint, usually the morning of that lecture. And when you're going through and listening to the lecture, I found that it was very helpful to just type in notes exactly how my professor was speaking. And I found this helpful because it's all new terminology. So for me, coming from a banking background, getting into nursing, there were so many new terms and abbreviations and things that I wasn't used to, that hearing a professor talk about it and being able to type it in real words made it make sense for me. So in saying that, I did not read ahead. I did have plenty of friends that did that and it worked for them. I never read ahead because I would confuse myself. And I mean confuse myself because there's all of this new terminology, and it's basically like I'm self-teaching what's going on in the class instead of listening to someone explain it to me first. So before the lecture, I would do nothing except for download that PowerPoint and type in those notes. And then during the lecture, all I'm doing is typing in the notes and listening actively, so not being distracted. Now, when I got home, then I would do the readings, and I found that that was really helpful for me because I could then kind of visualize what was being talked about in class and being referred to in the PowerPoints, what I was reading then in the chapters. So from going from the notes to reading, the last thing that I would do is the next day, I would go and review that PowerPoint again. And I would review the PowerPoint and the little notes that I had. And this is not a long, arduous process. This was not hours. This was just a quick review because this is now my third time hearing it or looking at the material. So by this point, I'm more familiar. I'm looking at those little notes that I wrote and I'm really hammering home that information. So for me, that 3-step process of typing in the notes, then reading the chapter, then reviewing what I typed on that PowerPoint, that really worked for me to cement the knowledge. Now, on the breaks in the lecture hall, I would also bring my AirPods and I would put them on noise cancellation. I did this so that I could basically close out all the other noise that was happening in the lecture hall and I could actually do my work. So I did, like I said in episode 1, have a full-time job. So this would allow me to pull up my work computer, answer emails, maybe make some telephone calls if I needed to make those, and use that time valuably. I also had a friend that would just basically close her eyes and tune out and just try to marinate in that information. And when things were not busy with work, I would also do this, and I found that it was just really peaceful and helpful for me to get through the information instead of like running to go and do something with friends or go and get a cup of coffee. It helped to just plug in your headphones, kind of close out all that noise and do something else. So either do nothing at all or do something on the side if you do have a job. So the second last thing with lectures is to put your hand up and ask those silly questions. Now, I know in the moment it seems so horrifying to put up your hand and ask something that you might think is stupid or other people might think is stupid. However, you are a nurse. You are going to be a professional healthcare worker, and it is important to know what you're doing. So if you don't understand something, don't be shy and put up your hand and ask that silly question, because you will never forget what the answer is after you've put yourself in that situation and you've asked. And it just shows initiative at the end of the day that you're there to learn and you are excited about the material. So not only do the optics look good, but you will learn the material. And now, I know that sounds scary, but it is a very safe place to do that when you are in the lecture hall, because you do have to consider that one day you will be done. You will have passed your board exams and you will be a nurse. And you want to be walking through the hallways of whichever establishment you're working at, knowing that material and feeling like you really made the most out of your education, and you will never see all of those people you went to school with again or any of those professors that taught you, but you can know that you looked back and you asked those questions, you put yourself in that situation to learn, and you are a better nurse today because of it. So the last thing is study groups. So I'm kind of against study groups. I did not have full-blown study groups. I had basically what we would call a power session. So we would get together on Zoom. This is partially due to the COVID situation. We would get together on Zoom and we would all just bring up the topics that didn't make sense to us. So, hey, can you explain that? And that would be explained by a friend of mine that maybe mastered that topic. And then she would ask something of, hey guys, I'm struggling with these topics. And hearing someone else explain it from a different perspective usually is all you need to understand something that is complex. So I found that these power sessions really helped me with the tough points, and it didn't overwhelm me with trying to study like other people study, because everyone does have a very unique perspective on studying and a different way of using their time. So it's helpful to just ask. So it was helpful for me to just ask, what do you think about these? Or could you help me understand this process? And that is what I say as a study group just helped me learn the material. Next portion that I'm putting in this part of the video, this half, is clinical. So clinical, like I said back in classes and lectures, it really helps to show up and familiarize yourself with where you're going in different wings and classrooms. It also helps to show up to wherever you are going for your clinical. So I say this because clinical jumps up on you super early in the morning. You're usually out the door at 5 in the morning, you're at the site at 5:30, and you're on the floor at 6 o'clock in the morning. So this was for my program. I'm not sure if other programs are like this. However, you do not want to be struggling with parking and trying to figure out where you are going that first morning. So The other reason why I say this is really important in clinical is because in clinical, it was basically 3 strikes and you're out. So 3 strikes and of being late and you are done. You have failed clinical, and like I mentioned before, that was one of the 3 core competency classes. So if you fail clinical, doesn't matter how well you were doing in lab or how well you were doing in theory, you are doing all of those again next semester and basically holding yourself back. So do not be late. It also helped me understand a little bit why it was so important to be on time. And this is not, oh, I showed up 20 minutes late, oops. This is like very strict. This was 2 or 3 minutes late and you would be docked, because you are being linked up with another nurse. So when you're on the floor, you're with someone that is doing their job day to day, and they are working and they are there to provide excellent patient care. You do not want to hold them up from doing their job. So being on time is not only respectful, but it is an excellent skill to have in life going forward as a nurse, and having to be on time for patients. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention in this video in clinical is bringing your own food. I ended up buying a frozen lunch bag that you just throw in the freezer and it keeps your food cold. The reason I say it's important is because food is not only expensive, but I found it was also pretty crappy. The stuff that you had to buy there was a lot of processed foods, a lot of really dead, devoid of nutrient foods, and they were very expensive. So not only are you spending money, but you're fueling your body with not great stuff. And it takes a lot of time to go and get in line with 100 other people that are also going to buy their lunch. When you are a student, you have very limited break time, so you would sometimes have a lunch that was like 20 minutes long. So you want to be able to go and grab your food and shovel that down as fast as you can, and then get back onto the floor and not be standing in line paying for expensive food that is not also going to serve your body. So with my little one in the background, adding to the acoustics, to recap from episode 2, setting yourself up for success, the first segment of this is talking about we talked about the class component and the lectures, how to take notes, and the clinical component. So I will see you back for episode 2, part 2 in a minute.